Hello and welcome to the FinTech Australia podcast, presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in FinTech executive search. I'm your host, Dexter Cousins, and in today's show, we're joined by the co-founders of Athena Home Loans, Nathan Walsh and Michael Starkey. But before we talk to Nathan and Michael, a big shout out to our awesome partners, FinTech Australia, a member-driven organisation building an ecosystem of Australian fintechs advancing the global economy. We share their mission to build a strong community, foster connections, and support innovation. If you're not a member yet, go to fintechaustralia.org.au. Nathan, Michael, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Dexter.
Absolutely.
2 years. I won't believe it. What an incredible journey. How have you gone about celebrating your 2-year anniversary, chaps?
Well, yeah, it certainly is a milestone. 2 years since we launched, and sort of 3.5 since we originally raised our first funding. We have a bit of a moment where we give a 2-year jacket to team members who've been around for that long, and so there's a real recognition of each person and what they've done over that period of time. It's quite interesting just how thick and fast those 2-year jackets are coming now. So just being at a point where we've settled over $2 billion of loans and really got ourselves to some scale, it's been quite an amazing period of time.
And for you, Michael, how have you gone about celebrating?
Actually Melbourne-based, Dexter, and a lot of the team are up in Sydney. And I must say, pre-COVID, it was much easier to get together and have these office celebrations. But so we
don't tell me you're the guy who dresses up as the pharaoh on Zoom.
No, so it's been it's one of the things I think we did quite well at Athena is celebrate the various milestones. And although it's 2 years since our public launch, it's actually been a lot longer, as Nathan said, since we started the business. 3.5 years, and we are good at celebrating the milestones, whether it's an anniversary or whether it's hitting the $1 billion of settlements or what have you. We do have a lot of fun with it.
Awesome. Well, we're going to talk about that journey in a few moments, but we got a lot of listeners who are overseas, and I wondered if you could just share with them a little bit about Athena Home Loans and what you do.
Yeah, so very simply, we're a non-bank lender focused on Australian residential mortgages, and we're on a mission to help Australians pay down their home loan faster and save a whole bunch of money in the process. So we're using technology to take out the cost and the capital, the complexity out of the home loan process, ultimately coming back to, for a home loan borrower, savings, service, simple.
We were to talk about this journey that you've been on. Yeah, we're celebrating 2 years, but as you mentioned, Michael, it goes back 3.5 years ago. How did you get the idea for Athena? How did that come about?
Yeah, well, I mean, really, it dates back to around February, so almost 4 years ago exactly. Nathan and I both sat on the same leadership team. We both worked for NAB, one of the biggest banks in the country, for a decade or so. And we sat down in a cafe having breakfast, and Nathan really came up with the discussion around where technology has moved and where the funding markets are moving, and the opportunity to do something quite different in mortgages. And it wasn't there wasn't a big amount of time where we stewed on the idea. We actually got very excited about the Athena concept very quickly. So during the month of March, we got together several times. We vetted it with some people that we knew in the industry to make sure that we weren't going crazy or anything. And we pretty much made up our minds to quit our jobs within a few weeks of having that conversation. Is that your recollection, Nathan?
Yeah, absolutely. It was sort of quite remarkable how quickly things moved. And I think, Dexter, when we last spoke, we talked about, the first 3 investors we spoke to all said yes, they wanted to fund things. So I think it was a little bit of an unusual story of just how quickly we moved from concept to having a team, writing code, getting moving.
Had either of you had startup experience before?
So I co-founded a business called iSelect. And that was way back in 1999. We had those conversations with a friend of mine from university, Damien Waller, who was the driving force behind that business. But I was part of that founding team. But I hadn't really, in a sense, I hadn't really built the business because I hadn't quit my job, got stuck into it and really worked at that company for 5 years while the business was getting built. So there was an itch there that I needed to scratch. And then Nathan, your experience is really around, I would say, entrepreneurship, wasn't it?
Yeah, so sort of founded NabTrade, so sort of the online trading platform. So in a corporate venture context rather than an external one. And so, clearly part of what we're doing is very similar to that, but clearly many dimensions doing it outside a corporate environment is quite different as well. So it's been fascinating going through, working out, same versus very, very different on so many dimensions. I think the big one is just when you assemble, great talent, have the backing of great investors, just how much is possible when you don't have the constraints and complexity of being part of a large organisation.
How did your families take the news when you broke it to them?
I think that was the toughest due diligence conversation we had when I sort of went to Elizabeth and talked to her about doing this. I mean, she'd clearly known we were looking at things for a while, but I think there's that moment of truth to say you're going to leave a sort of a comfortable, well-paying job in a large corporate and jump into the world of venturing, and you've got 3 kids and mortgage and all the rest of that. And so there was a very rapid due diligence process that went through, but ultimately really fantastic support, all the way through. And I think that's clearly a big part of these journeys is just how do you make it fit within your broader personal life and all the other commitments you have. And Michael, you're in the same place as well, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really touches on an important question because, I think part of the aim of your podcast is to speak to people who aspire to start businesses and involved in the whole startup scene. And it is a big call if you are in that situation and you need to back yourself. And I mean, Nathan and I were both, I would say, in the relatively fortunate positions where both Elizabeth in Nathan's case and Sandra in my case had high-paying jobs and were able to, in effect, be the breadwinners for the families while we sort of took a punt on something new. And that you shouldn't necessarily understate the importance of that in the mindset that allows you to actually forge a path like this, right?
Now, this is a really interesting kind of story and journey that you're sharing, because usually when I'm talking to founders, we talk about, well, what were the challenges that you faced along the way? And it was all, it's always getting investors on board. But by the sounds of it, you had the investors in place before you launched the business. So I'm kind of really curious as to what the challenges have been as you've gone along that journey.
I think, Dexter, the challenge that you note there around equity investors, we've always, right from the word go, and Nathan had contacts in Macquarie, and then we ended up having mutual contacts there. And they supported us in our seed round. We've always actually had very good support on the equity funding side. If I were to call out the challenges as we saw them right at the start, really we had to build a platform. We had to then get debt funding, and then we had to market and get customers on board, sort of in that order. And the piece where you really relied on large institutional investors supporting you was on the debt funding side. So not so much on that capital raise and that equity funding side. But the debt funding side, what it turns out is that once you've lent $500 million out, you get enormous support from a wide variety of debt funding partners or investors. But to get to the first $500 million, crossing that chasm turns out to be a massive challenge. And I would say that early, leaving aside some of the COVID disruption we had last year, I would say early on, Nathan, that was probably the piece that was more outside of our control and more challenging than in any other thing that we sort of had to do there.
Yeah, look, that's absolutely right. When you sort of think about the scale of funding required, so rather than millions of dollars of equity, it's hundreds of millions of dollars of debt. But then equally, just the risk appetite being quite different as well. And so, exactly as Michael said, just getting to the point where you've really been able to demonstrate track record, show that you can lend responsibly within all the credit and compliance, envelope. And to some extent, that's been one of the really exciting proof points of this year, as really being able to show, the quality that Athena has been able to deliver right through 2020 challenges. And that really then translating into incredibly strong support for funders for our growth into, this year and going forward. But I think when you first start on the journey, if lending is your business model, that will ultimately be one of the harder challenges in just getting to the right debt funding support given the particular target market you're going after.
It kind of, from an outsider looking in, it looked like you just came straight out of the blocks, and it's just been upward momentum since then. Has that been the case, or has it been more of a, perhaps a little bit more like a, duck on the water where the feet are flapping furiously, but you're nice and calm on the surface?
Oh, every startup will be like that, Dexter. Absolutely. The swan. There's feet down below pumping madly. But look, I think for us, this was ultimately a story about assembling a really, crack team. Right across, whether it was our, product or engineering, whether it's marketing, risk, operations, people and culture, really assembling a very, very strong leadership team very early in our journey. And again, that's probably an area where Michael and I were both very fortunate, the networks that we had been working in financial services for a long period of time. And that, I think, then translated into, the ability to, build out, a platform that really makes lending simpler, develop some proposition where there's some really big pain points in mortgages as an industry. And so how do we actually develop product and platform marketing really around solving those things? And so I think that's where there's lots and lots of things that we learnt along the way, and some of our original assumptions clearly evolved, clearly an important part of the startup journey. But when you've got the right team wrapped around you, the ability to be able to flex and take advantage of the opportunities presented as things shift. And so clearly over the last couple of years, moving from 2019 where, things like the Royal Commission being the dominant story to a very different environment last year, and then hopefully a much more positive one this year. Ultimately having, talent as sort of the core source of advantage is something we've been pretty passionate about.
And yourself, Michael, what do you kind of, what's been your feeling?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the paddling hard under the water, we have been very successful in terms of our launch and the volumes that we've been able to attract, etc. But standing up the funding behind that and the platform to be able to deliver on that has been enormously challenging. When you think about a mortgage business, there's actually a lot of different disciplines involved in starting a business from scratch. So if you think about the technology and product expertise you need, the risk, because as Nathan said, you're writing big tickets at low margins in the case of mortgages. So really having strength in risk. Marketing, because we're starting from scratch. So, a couple of years ago, no one had heard of Athena, and now a lot of Australians have, are choosing us for their mortgage. And then you've got the treasury side and having to stitch up the funding, and then you've got the operation sides and in terms of originating mortgages. So there are lots of very different disciplines that you have to stitch together to do a successful or to build a successful mortgage business. And each of those has had, enormous challenges. So, yeah, certainly not an easy journey, and one with but a rewarding one.
Well, I've got to say, you both do a remarkable job being calm on the surface, which kind of leads nicely into my other question, which is, what you've learned about each other over this last few years.
Well, I'll go first because Nathan and I were both colleagues together. We actually sat on the same leadership team at NAB. And, so you get a certain perspective of someone, and obviously we had a lot of trust in one another to go off and start the business together. What I didn't get an appreciation for was just how good Nathan was at the culture, the team building, the energizing people in the office, the having fun and making it a great place to work. Because that's not something that you sort of share with your colleagues at that leadership level sort of interaction that we had. So that's been one of the best parts of the experience working with Nathan over the last, or more closely, I should say, over the last 3 or 4 years.
Are there any things he does that annoys you?
No, not really. We still talk 2 or 3 times a day. And, we have a very healthy ability to debate topics and in a really, I would say in a really constructive way.
Great. And Nathan, what have you learned about Michael?
Yeah, look, I would definitely be in the mode of I came in with very high expectations, could not be more excited when I first started this thing to do that with Michael, given I'd known him for many years before. But it is absolutely a journey where you learn so much about the individual. And so just again, coming back to the audience, just getting the right co-founder is such a critical part of that. And so with Michael, what I love is just how, again, you made the point about that calm under pressure. There's lots of moments of stress, and being with a co-founder that's not a stress amplifier, but a very simply, how do we make the simple decisions fast, and then how do we be willing to really think deeply about the harder calls along the way, and having great judgment around which is which, and then at the same time just linking that back to incredible integrity and human value. So incredible privilege to be working with Mike, and I would just sort of say to listeners, it is one of those things where it's such a critical part of success is actually having someone where chemistry and respect and all these other things work incredibly tightly together, because it's a long road and there's lots of bumps, and you want to have people that you really feel comfortable in sharing that all the way through.
Yeah, it's I keep using the analogy of a family to a startup, and I remember when I became a parent, and it was just like launching my business, making it up as I went along for the first 12 to 18 months. Trying to deliver on 4 hours sleep per night. Michael, what advice have you got for people out there around, kind of finding the right co-founders? Anything that you would add to what Nathan shared?
Would 100% agree with Nathan that having a partner in crime is quite important, because it is a roller coaster. There's going to be hard days, there's going to be easy days. So having that partner in crime, I think, is really important. I think knowing someone for a long period of time is probably helps the most in terms of just understanding who they are and what they stand for, because you do hear horror stories of people who thought they had something in common, but really had quite different value sets. I do think that's probably the number one. That's probably the number one piece of advice in terms of finding someone.
Well, we're going to take a quick break now, chaps, whilst I shamelessly plug my business. Tier 1 People helps world-class fintech launch, scale, and innovate. As the fintech industry in Australia begins to mature, many of our early startup clients are now becoming enterprises. And as fintech goes mainstream, many enterprises are reinventing themselves as fintechs. Tier 1 People proudly works with companies at the forefront of fintech innovation. Our clients include international fintech, corporate ventures, big tech platforms, banks, payment providers, and financial institutions. We're about to kick off a number of searches for program and project management professionals to deliver significant acquisition, integration, and change programs. We're interested in talking to talent with expertise in merging fintech startups with banks, technology integration specialists in lending and banking, and those with expertise in transforming legacy financial services businesses into fintech. If you'd like to be on our radar for these upcoming opportunities, email your details to info@tier1people.com. Well, welcome back to the show, Michael and Nathan. We're going to have a chat now about something you touched on just before, Michael, which was the culture, and really the culture that you're trying to build at Athena. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that, Nathan.
Yeah, it's actually, again, a topic that I think it's really worth spending time thinking about as a founder. When you first start a startup, and it really is a tiny team, then culture is really not much more than who are the hires and what do the interactions look like. But it very quickly gets to the point where you're scaling out, lots of new people are coming on board, and you really want to have set the firm foundations for what that looks like. And so, as Michael sort of described before, this is a business where there's lots of different functions that need to work really well together. You want the engineering and product teams and design working well with service and risk and all these other functions. And so we spent a lot of time up front really thinking about what does Athena need to represent so we can attract great talent, and so we can also turn that into something which you're getting great effectiveness in terms of how people are working together. And our starting point was this idea around what do we want to be with for customers needs to translate into who we want to be with each other. I mean, if you want to, have a proposition based on being straight up and being bold in developing new innovative solutions, you need to have a culture that actually supports that authentically. And so we went through a process, and ultimately there's sort of three words that we focus in on. It's a story around ambition. So, really we see this as a market where there are major customer pain points. We want to be willing to break what's broken and forge a real revolution in how mortgages are delivered. We want it to be a story around passion. We want, leadership with heart in terms of how we deal with each other, how we embrace diversity, how we think about those dimensions. And then ultimately it's about action, this idea that we want to make every day, every minute, every dollar count. And so we can move at speed and we can really, get real traction and deliver things through. And so we've actually spent a lot of time really thinking through those dimensions and how we communicate. And it's actually something we've just gone through a refresh at our two-year period of time. And so ultimately, I think, our success is about how do you attract incredible talent, the folks dealing with customers on the phone, great engineers, great product, all of these other dimensions. And so the experience that people come, not only when you're a team of, 6 on day one, or when you're a team of, 60 or 120, or, as you scale through, how do you really think about those dimensions, I think is actually something that is such an important part of the journey.
Yeah. One of the, Michael, maybe if you could answer this question for me, but we see time and time again, businesses who kind of in those early stages bring in all of the people in their network that are known to them to help them build out the business. And sometimes it works. A lot of times it causes a lot of scaling issues. What did you do differently to ensure that, you were bringing in not only people that were known to you, but people who could actually be part of this growth story and would help you scale the business effectively?
Yeah, so, if you look at our early hires, there were a lot of, particularly our leadership team, that did come through our networks and that were known to us from before. But I think one of the differences being that you do see founders almost build a business bottom up and then having to delayer people along the journey. So, for example, a couple of strong founders with hiring, 2 or 3 very junior people to begin with, and then later on having to sort of put people in between. We sort of took the opposite approach. We took the view that we needed to, just because of the nature of the business, we needed very experienced, very good people, very senior people as some of our first hires. So we almost filled out the entire leadership team before we got many more junior people in there.
Yeah.
And so, that's probably, as some of our VC investors have sort of noted that as a difference in our approach versus some of the other companies that they've seen on their journeys. You take for example, all of the our chief technology officer, our chief risk officer, they all have come from, very, very big jobs. So we knew that they could scale with us. So we did rely heavily on our network, and we've mixed it up a bit as well, but with a focus on early hire of very senior people.
Okay. And so what do you think is now the profile of person that is successful at Athena? What do they look like?
Do you want to have a crack at that one, Nathan? I mean, it's quite a different bunch.
Yeah, look, I mean, ultimately, we are looking for people who do bring, great talent and horsepower, but importantly, the culture aspect we were talking before about how can they work incredibly well as part of a broader team. So, not low ego type view, and so for us that translates to quite different backgrounds, right? So, from engineering. Most of those people are not coming from a financial services background. They're coming with engineering excellence with, our chief technology officer was out of Atlassian, our head of engineering was from AWS, lots of people from, Salesforce and a bunch of other kind of components versus when you're talking about people who are going to go and have a responsible lending conversation on the phone or assess the credit, et cetera, they are typically coming from a banking type background. And so the big part of that is how do you get people who are going to be comfortable about working with a pretty diverse range of backgrounds and culture on all of the various dimensions of diversity, because it is that connection between the functions is where so much of the value comes through. And I think importantly, the other one is, Michael sort of talked about the horsepower and seniority of what people have done before, but a lot of that is also, the willingness to really roll up your sleeves and get things done, right? So it's, folks who we ultimately see as being in the seat, when we're a very large company, but at the same time willing to hold a mop, right? Willing to do what needs to be done to deliver value to customers today. And so that flexibility and mindset. There's some people who just thrive and love those opportunities, and there's clearly others who want to be surrounded with all of the support structures that a large corporation provide, and that's clearly not going to be a fit for this kind of role.
And how big is the business now in terms of people?
We're 110.
Wow. So in terms of where you think this is going to head and growth, do you have a cap of, hey, this is how many people we think will be, or are you keeping that open at the minute?
I think if you think about how we scale, there are clearly roles. A lot of those roles are sort of semi-fixed, in sort of tech teams, treasury teams, product teams, etc. They'll scale a bit, but not in proportion to loans. But as we grow, there is also a variable component of that staff base. So we will absolutely grow that head count over time, but it won't be necessarily in proportion to the amount of loans we're writing, just because we have got a very scalable model.
So do you ever see the kind of culture? We've seen this with a lot of businesses that the disruptor ends up being the business that they're set to disrupt, and Google's a great example. 100,000 people, huge business. And we see a lot of our clients come to us and say, get me somebody from Google. And that person isn't necessarily going to fit into a 20, 30, 50 person business. Do you see your culture kind of evolving and becoming, the big kind of enterprise like a big bank? Or do you think kind of where you're at now is pretty much where you're going to be for the foreseeable future of the business?
Yeah, no, it's a really critical point, Dexter, around how, as you scale, you're very thoughtful about what are the foundations that you want to fight to retain the day one feel versus dimensions where you do need to evolve on some other components. So, huge respect for sort of, Jeff Bezos' sort of view around, even at the scale of Amazon, how do you have that day one approach? How do you break pieces of work down to smaller squads so you can retain that real ability to innovate and extend? And we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we have the business system broken up into those bite-sized chunks so that we can continue to grow, innovate, service with the right components. But equally, of course, there are other dimensions where you do need to be thoughtful about the ability to operate at different scale and invest in the right ways without translating into the complexity of the large organisations. And so for us, probably the secret behind that is around focus and purpose. We've come in with this idea to say we are going to be a specialist home lender. We are going to do that better than anyone else in Australia in terms of the platform we deliver, the product solutions, the marketing, all of those other dimensions. And at the same time, coming with a really clear, what do we stand for? Why are we here? And I think with those sorts of dimensions, I think that allows you to keep the focus on not building the complacency, not turning into the complex organisations, just too hard to get things done. That too many of us have spent time in at different points in our career.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more broadly about the Australian fintech space and what's happening. Before we do that, Nathan, great to see you get on board Fintech Australia and an NED there. What's been your kind of first few months into that role, and how are you enjoying it?
Oh, loving it. I mean, I'm still very much the baby on the board there, so very early perspectives, but huge respect for what Rebecca and the broader team are doing there. I think it's a really important part of how do we ultimately change financial services in Australia to serve customers and community better. Mm-hmm. And I think the ecosystem that Fintech Australia is building, the engagement that they have back into government, regulators, I just think a critically important sort of function. So delighted to be sort of part of part of that community, and how do we actually help both create new startups and lower the barriers there, but also ultimately this is about how do we help build some really large scale businesses that deliver for customers, community, and investors.
It's just having been close partners with the organisation for a couple of years now. It's just amazed me at how much pace and momentum the entire industry's got in Australia. And I think back even just 2.5 years, and we were at awards events kind of patting each other on the back saying well done for having a try. And the next awards that we have, we're going to have Afterpay there with a market cap of $40 billion, and it's incredible. Now, Michael, I've got a question for you. I ask every guest this, which is, other than your own business, which fintech has got you most excited and why? I'm
going to put our judo bank at the moment. And for me, there are a lot of different types of fintech. Yeah. So there's specialist players like Athena in the mortgage space. There's sort of people in the FX space that we admire, like AirWallex and stuff. But for me, the hardest thing to do is to be a bank, because of the capital you need and the breadth of offerings that you need, and just the backing. And the fact that team, who we know well, we used to be colleagues of a lot of the judo team, the fact that they've been able to get the backing to do what they've done and then reach profitability in such a short space of time, for me, that's a really exciting one, because that is the hardest category to succeed in, and the fact that they've sort of shown the way there, I think is really exciting.
Excellent. And I guess your general view of fintech in Australia, how are you seeing the industry right now? You talk there, it's really broad, right? I mean, we've touched on just a very small portion of some of the kind of streams that we've got, but if you put it as a whole, what do you think?
Huge opportunity. So there are players that are half competing, cooperating with the banks. There's also a bunch of players that the general public won't have heard of, because they're providing services and utilities to fintechs and traditional players. So Basic and Look Who's Charging and all these sorts of things. I mean, you just take the view that financial services in this country is a huge industry, maybe 600 billion of market cap. And that 95 to 99% of that industry is still run off relatively legacy technology stacks, and which results in inefficiencies and poor customer experiences, etc. So the opportunity for fintech both to compete against banks or major banks and traditional players, but also to provide services to organizations and help and partner with banks to innovate around that, there's just a huge runway. And then you couple that with basically the venture capital scene coming of age. I mean, I read just this morning that last year $2 billion of venture capital was invested. Now that would have been a completely different story back in when the likes of AirTree and SquarePeg started their businesses in 5 or 10 years ago. And the fact that the government is has a stated ambition to promote fintech as an industry, I think that should give the industry a lot of runway.
Right. Now we're going to wrap up, chaps. But other than your second birthday, what other exciting news do you have to share?
Actually, really great question. And we've got like a lot of things underway. So it's probably less the ta-da announcement today, Dexter, but more the mode of saying, couldn't be more excited about the portfolio of innovation work that the teams are working on at the moment. Just 2021 is going to be rolling thunder of a whole bunch of ways that we're looking to improve things for consumers. We really think that mortgages is a bit of a scorpion dominated business. There's so many consumers buying loans and end up being stung with loyalty tax and high fees and charges and all the rest of it. And so a real opportunity for us to go and deliver some big savings to consumers. And at the same time, very excited in terms of the kind of volumes, that we're achieving. So January was our busiest January ever. We had over $500 million of apps. Wow. And so just really excited around, what 2021 is going to look like, assuming that, on the health and economy and all the dimensions that the current sort of positive landscape continues.
Great. And Michael, where can people find out more about Athena?
www.athena.com.au. Visit our website, and if you are paying any more than 2.19% for your mortgage, you should come and talk to us.
And Nathan, if anybody's interested in joining Athena, where should they head?
Yeah, so again, going to our website, athena.com.au, and it will highlight some of the opportunities there. We're always looking for great talent, and so would love to have a conversation.
Well, chaps, it's been absolutely fantastic to have you on the show.
Thanks.
Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Dexter. Real pleasure.
And you can find me, Dexter Cousins, on LinkedIn, or follow the Tier 1 People page on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. And if you like today's show, subscribe to the podcast and don't forget to leave us a review. It really helps me bring on great guests like Nathan and Michael. This show is produced by Tier 1 People, leaders in fintech executive search. We'll help you launch, scale, and innovate by delivering world-class talent. And you can reach us info@tier1people.com. Until the next episode, stay safe,